to Deep Sleep Stories. If these stories have helped you through restless nights, please leave a review. Reviews are what help this podcast grow, reach more listeners, and stay alive. Without them, even something meaningful can slowly disappear. So if this show has brought you comfort, that small act truly helps keep it going. Now, settle in, and let's begin.
Welcome to Deep Sleep Stories, where tonight you will drift toward a cabin at the edge of the world, in Dreamland, a quiet place of lantern light, snow-soft silence, and endless stars. Settle in now and let your body grow a little heavier with each breath. You are already on the path. It is a narrow path, silvered by moonlight, winding through a wide and peaceful hush. The air is cool, but never cold enough to bite. It brushes your cheeks like silk dipped in winter. Somewhere nearby, though you cannot quite see where, water moves slowly over stone with the gentlest sound, as if the night itself were breathing. Above you, the sky is vast and deep, a dark blue that seems to go on forever. The stars are bright here, brighter than you have ever known them, and they do not glitter sharply. They glow with a steady kindness, like small lamps left on for late travelers. As you walk, the path gives softly beneath your feet, cushioned with moss and old pine needles. The trees stand on either side of you, tall and watchful, their branches furred with pale lichen and drifting threads of mist. Every now and then, a sleepy wind moves through them, and they answer with a low whispering murmur. Take a long, easy breath in and let it go. There is nowhere to rush to, no task waiting for you, no question you need to solve. Only this path, only this quiet, only the slow approach to a warm light in the distance. You may notice it now between the trunks of the trees, a glow the color of honey and amber, soft and steady. A cabin window perhaps, a lantern at a porch, a place that has been expecting you without hurry for a very long time. Breathe in again, gently. And as you breathe out, let your shoulders soften. Let your jaw unclench. Let the small muscles around your eyes loosen and rest. The path bends once more and the trees begin to open, their shadows widening into a meadow of pale grasses and low white flowers that bloom only at night. A quiet mist lies over the ground, thin as spun glass. Beyond the meadow, at the very edge of everything you can see, stands the cabin. It rests on a little rise built of dark wood and smooth stone, with a roof steep enough to hold snowfall and windows glowing gold. A narrow porch wraps around the front, draped with climbing vines that carry tiny blue lights in their leaves. Behind the cabin, the land falls away into a luminous horizon where sea and sky and cloud seem to blend into one dreamlike line. You slow your steps. And now, as the night gathers you more gently, as the path becomes softer and the light warmer, The story loosens from your hands and settles into its own slow rhythm. At the edge of the world in Dreamland, where the forests thinned into cloud and the cliffs leaned over sleeping stars, there stood a cabin that had no map and no road in waking life. It had been there for as long as the moon remembered. By day, if day it could be called, the cabin looked out over a quiet expanse of silver water that did not always behave like water. Sometimes it rippled like a lake, sometimes it drifted like fog, sometimes it reflected not the sky above, but other skies entirely. Dawn in a distant valley, a storm passing over golden fields, a summer evening in a city of bells. But at night, which was most of the time in that far and gentle place, it became still and dark and shining, like polished obsidian veined with starlight. The cabin itself was small but not cramped. It had a way of feeling exactly as large as it needed to be. Its timbers were old cedar, fragrant and smooth, their grain gleaming softly where lamplight touched them. The stones of its chimney were river-rounded and flecked with quartz. A wind bell of shell and copper hung under the eaves, and when the breeze turned kind, it made a sound like tiny distant chimes underwater. Inside, everything had a hush to it. There was a hearth of pale stone and a low fire that never smoked, only glowed. There was a kettle that sang in a sleepy murmur. There were thick, woven rugs, a deep chair by the window, shelves lined with jars of tea leaves and dried flowers, and a long table marked with the faint scratches of many peaceful evenings. There was a bed in the loft, beneath a slanted roof, layered with quilts, the color of moonlit cream and cloud gray wool, and there was a keeper of the cabin, though in Dreamland no one used such formal words. She was simply called Mira by the few who found their way there. Mira had hair the color of winter bark, streaked with silver at the temples, and eyes that held the calm of someone who had spent many years listening to rain. She moved quietly through the cabin, never in haste, always with a kind of unspoken attention, as though every object, every cup, every folded blanket, every lit candle deserved to be handled as gently as a sleeping bird. No one knew exactly where Mira came from. Some said she had once been a traveler who wandered too far into a dream and decided to stay. Some said she was born from the first warm fire ever lit against a cold night. Some said she was part of the cabin itself, as natural and old as the cedar beams. Mira did not explain. She only tended the place. Each evening, if evening it was, she stepped onto the porch with a lantern and looked out across the horizon where the world frayed into starlit mist. Sometimes she saw nothing but drifting cloud and the slow rise of moons, one large and pearl white, another small and amber, and now and then a third, thin and green as sea glass. Sometimes she saw strange things at the edge of sight, a staircase of light descending through fog, a flock of luminous birds flying without wing beats, a boat gliding over empty air as though it were a river. And every so often she saw a traveler. They came quietly, almost always by the moon path, through the trees, a child carrying a pocket full of smooth stones, an old woman with laughter still warm in her eyes, a young baker who smelled faintly of cinnamon and flour, a musician who had forgotten his song and wanted only to rest. Travelers arrived not because they had meant to come, but because some deep and tired part of them had needed a place like this. Mira always knew what to do. A cup of tea perhaps, with mint and honey for one, warm milk with cardamom for another, a blanket set near the fire, a soft word, a quiet room, a window left open a crack for those who slept best to the sound of the wind. When morning came, if it came, they were gone again, returned to their own worlds with no map in their pockets, only a lingering sense of comfort, as if they had once slept somewhere impossibly safe. One night, the wind shifted before the traveler appeared. Mira noticed it while she was polishing the glass chimney of the porch lantern. The breeze came from the far horizon instead of the forest, carrying with it the scent of snow and distant pine and something else. Something faintly sweet, like crushed lavender and old paper. She set the lantern down and listened. The cabin listened too. The beams gave a tiny, settling sigh. The wind bell under the eaves made one soft note and then was still. Out beyond the meadow, the night flowers turned their pale faces toward the tree line. Mira wrapped a shawl around her shoulders and waited on the porch. After a time, a figure emerged from the forest, moving slowly along the moonlit path. It was a young man, though in Dreamland age was a soft and shifting thing. He wore a coat dusted with fine frost and carried no bag, no lantern, no visible sign of where he had come from. He paused at the edge of the meadow, as if surprised to find the cabin there at all. Mira lifted the lantern, its amber glow reaching him across the mist. He gave a small, tired nod and crossed the meadow. Up close, his face held the look of someone who had not rested well for many nights. Not distressed exactly, and not afraid, simply worn thin, like paper folded and unfolded too many times. His eyes moved briefly to the porch vines with their blue lights, then to the dark line of sea and sky beyond the cabin, then back to Mira. "Good evening," she said, and her voice seemed to fit the night so well that even the wind grew softer to hear it. "Good evening," he answered, as if testing whether speech still worked. "You've come a long way." "I think I have," he said, "though I'm not sure from where." Mira nodded as if that made perfect sense. "It often happens that way. Come in. The kettle is warm." Inside, the fire brightened slightly as they entered, as if pleased to see another soul. Mira hung the lantern by the door and set a cedar cup on the table. She did not ask questions right away. She moved with her familiar, quiet rhythm. Water poured into the kettle, herbs measured with gentle fingers, a spoon of honey catching the firelight. The young man sat in the chair by the hearth and watched the flames. After a while, with the tea steaming between his hands, his shoulders lowered for the first time. "This place," he said softly, "feels like something I knew once." Mira sat across from him with her own cup. wrapped in both hands. Many things in Dreamland do. He looked into the fire for a long time. The cabin waited with him. Outside, the wind drifted over the porch roof and through the grasses. Somewhere far below the cliffs, the dream sea gave a low, slow murmur. "I have a name," he said at last, and his voice held a little more strength now, as though he had found a thread and taken hold of it. "It's Elias." "Mira," she said with a small smile. "Welcome, Elias." He nodded and sipped his tea. "I was following a light," he murmured. "Or maybe a sound. I can't remember. I only remember being tired. I lay down, I think. Or maybe I closed my eyes while sitting in a chair near a window. Then there was a path, trees, stars, and..." He looked toward the dark window pane where the glass reflected the hearth in warm gold. "And this." Mira did not press him. "Then this is what was needed." Elias stayed that night in the loft under the slanted roof. Mira gave him a quilt heavy enough to feel comforting and a small oil lamp whose flame glowed blue instead of gold. "It burns low and slow," she said. "Some travelers like a little light while they rest." Before he slept, he stood at the loft window and looked out over the edge of the world. The horizon was filled with cloud terraces and drifting stars, and between them moved thin ribbons of luminous mist, folding and unfolding like breath. He had the odd feeling that if he listened very carefully, he might hear distant voices, not speaking words, only humming, as if the whole dreamland were singing itself to sleep. He slept deeply. In the morning, though dreamland mornings often resembled twilight touched with pearl, he woke to the smell of bread warming by the fire. For a few quiet moments he did not know where he was, and then he remembered the path, the porch vines, the cabin. Instead of unease, he felt a calm wonder, as though remembering a place from a childhood story. Mira was downstairs slicing pears into a bowl. The window over the table was open, letting in cool air and the fragrance of wet moss. Outside, the meadow shone with dew that looked almost like tiny stars caught in grass. "You may stay as long as you like," Mira said without turning. "Dreamland is generous with those who arrive tired." Elias came down the ladder slowly, hand on the rail, polished smooth by many travelers before him. "I don't know how long that is." "No one does," Mira replied. "Sit, eat while it's warm." So he stayed, not forever. Dreamland had its own way with time, and forever was a word too stiff for it. But he stayed long enough for days, or what passed for days, to become gentle and distinct. He helped Mira with small things around the cabin. He gathered split cedar from the lean-to behind the house, where the wood was always dry. He brushed snow-fine pollen from the porch rail after the night flowers shed it. He fetched water from a spring hidden in a hollow of stone, a short walk into the trees, where the water rose clear and cold and tasted faintly of mint. He learned which shelves held sleep tea and which held waking tea, which blankets were light and which ones felt like a warm cloud. And always there was quiet. Not empty quiet, living quiet. The quiet of steam rising from a kettle. The quiet of bread crust crackling as it cooled. The quiet of wind moving through the pines in long, low sighs. The quiet of embers settling red in the hearth at the end of a long evening. Sometimes travelers arrived, and Elias watched Mira welcome them. A woman in a rain-dark cloak who carried the smell of city streets after a storm and fell asleep by the fire before her tea had cooled. A fisherman with silver scales clinging to his sleeves, though there was no sea in his waking home, who sat on the porch listening to the wind bell until dawn. Two sisters, no older than 10, who came laughing and whispering and were soon curled together in the loft bed under quilts, their dreams so peaceful that the blue lamp burned without flicker all night. Elias never asked where they came from. He began to understand that the cabin was not a place for answers, but for rest. One evening, after a long hush of snowfall that laid the meadow under a white glow, Mira found Elias standing at the cliff's edge behind the cabin. He was watching the dream sea below, where dark water moved under floating sheets of light. He spoke without turning. I used to think I needed to keep going, always. Even in my sleep, I felt I should be doing something, remembering something, fixing something. Mira stood beside him, shawl wrapped close, and looked out over the same view. And now, he breathed in the cold, star-bright air. Now I'm not sure. The world doesn't seem to end just because I rest. Below them, a slow wave reached the black rocks and broke in a line of silver sparks. Mira smiled, the expression gentle and quiet. No, it rarely does. The moons rose higher, pearl, amber, and the small sea glass one trailing a little behind, and their light pooled in the snow. The cabin windows glowed warm at their backs. For a while, they said nothing more. As Elias stayed, the place revealed itself to him in small, patient ways. He discovered a path behind the woodpile that led to a grove of white birch trees whose bark shone faintly at night. When the wind moved through them, the leaves made a sound like very soft rain. At the center of the grove stood a stone bench, worn smooth by weather and time. Sitting there, he could see the cabin roof through the trees and the stars beyond it. And sometimes he sat for what felt like hours, doing nothing but listening. He found that the attic above the loft was not an attic at all, but a room of shelves and trunks and folded maps made of cloth. On the walls hung lanterns of every shape, glass globes, pierced tin stars, carved wooden moons, each waiting quietly. Mira told him they were for journeys, but not all at once. Some lights belonged to paths not yet taken, she said. There was also a tiny garden on the lee side of the cabin, protected by stones warm from the chimney. It grew in impossible seasons, thyme next to frost lilies, rosemary beside moon moss, pale strawberries that tasted of summer rain. Elias watered it in the cool blue hours, while the horizon glimmered and the forest still dreamed. And there was music sometimes, not from instruments. Not exactly. On certain nights, when the cloud line was low and the stars looked especially near, the dream sea hummed against the cliffs in long notes that rose and fell. The chimney would answer in a softer tone, and the wind bell would join with a bright, tiny sound. The cabin timbers, the glass in the windows, the kettle lid, even the stacked cups on the shelf would seem to listen and ring faintly in sympathy. On those nights, Mira dimmed the lamps, and they sat by the fire without speaking, listening to Dreamland sing. One such night, Elias asked, "Do people always leave?" Mira fed one small cedar stick to the embers and watched it catch. Almost always. And you? I am where I should be. He nodded, though he could not yet imagine choosing one place forever, even a place as gentle as this. The song of the sea drifted through the chimney and around the room. After a while, Mira said, "Leaving is not the opposite of belonging." Elias turned that thought over slowly, like a warm stone in his hand. Winter deepened, though Dreamland winter was a kind one. Snow came in soft veils and rested on the porch rail, on the pine boughs, on the meadow grasses bowed under white. The night flowers slept beneath the frost, but their roots glowed faintly through the snow, blue-green threads in the earth. Inside, the cabin grew even cozier. Mira baked loaves with cracked tops and brushed them with melted butter. Elias learned to mend wool socks by firelight, his stitches uneven at first and then neat. They brewed teas of chamomile and juniper, spruce tip and lemon peel. They read from old books whose pages smelled of dust and cedar and something sweet like vanilla. Some books held stories, some held sketches of stars. Some were blank until opened and then slowly filled with words shaped by the reader's thoughts. When storms passed over the edge of the world, they watched from the porch with blankets around their shoulders. Lightning traveled horizontally through the far clouds, silent and white like roots growing across the sky. Rain sometimes fell upward from the dream sea to the clouds above, bead by silver bead. Elias stopped trying to understand every wonder. He simply looked and breathed and rested. At some point, no one in Dreamland would say exactly when, Elias began to dream inside the dream. In those deeper dreams, he walked through places from his waking life, but they were gentler than before. A room where papers had once been stacked in anxious towers now held only a single lamp and a sleeping cat. The train platform, where he had once rushed and worried, became a quiet station with no schedule, only warm benches and soft rain. Faces he knew appeared and smiled, not asking anything of him. When he woke in the loft beneath the slanted roof, listening to the hush of the cabin and the low fire below, he felt as though knots inside him had loosened in the night. One evening, as snowmelt began to bead from the eaves and the meadow showed hints of green through the thaw, Mira handed him a small lantern from the attic shelves. It was made of frosted glass set in brushed copper, no bigger than his two hands together. Tiny stars were etched around its rim. The handle was wrapped in soft leather gone smooth with age. Elias looked at it, then at her. "Is this for work?" Mira's eyes held their usual quiet humor. "In a way." He turned the lantern in his hands. It was lighter than it looked. Inside, there was no wick. "How does it light?" "With what you are ready to carry," she said. He frowned, not in frustration but thought. "And what am I ready to carry?" Mira opened the door to the porch. Cool air slid in, smelling of wet earth and pine resin and the first waking flowers beneath the snow. "Come and see." They stood beneath a sky rinsed clear after storm. The moons were thin tonight and the stars seemed especially deep. Beyond the cliff, the dream sea was dark velvet with slow silver lines. Mira touched the lantern lightly just above Elias's fingers. At first, nothing happened. Then slowly, a pale light appeared inside the frosted glass, soft as breath on a window. It grew warmer, steady, and quiet, not bright enough to dazzle, only enough to illuminate his hands and the porch boards at his feet. Elias watched in silence. The light flickered once, then settled. "What is it?" he whispered. Mira looked out toward the horizon where the world dissolved into mist. "A little of your own rest, perhaps. A little of what you found here. Enough to see by when the path is dim." He held the lantern closer, and the etched stars cast tiny shapes on his sleeves. Something inside him, which had been drifting for a long time, grew still. Not trapped, not ended. Simply still, like water when the wind stops. After that night, Elias carried the lantern often. He took it to the birch grove and set it beside the stone bench while he listened to leaves whisper. He carried it to the spring in the forest hollow, where the pale light shimmered on the water. He hung it on the porch rail while he watched snowmelt trickle from the roof and the first night flowers open again, one by one, white and luminous. Travelers came and went, and sometimes they glanced at the lantern with sleepy recognition, as though they too had once held such a light. A few smiled at him as they passed through the door. He smiled back, easy and unhurried. Then, one dawn-colored twilight, Elias woke before the fire was stirred and before the kettle sang. The loft was dim. The blue lamp had gone out on its own sometime in the night. The cabin held that special stillness that comes just before waking, as if every beam and cup and thread of wool were listening. He sat up and knew, with the strange certainty Dreamland sometimes gave, that his stay was drawing to a close. There was no fear in it, no sharp sadness, only a tenderness and a quiet ache, the way one feels when finishing a beautiful book and wanting to linger one more page. He climbed down the ladder and found Mira at the table, already awake, hands around a steaming cup. She looked up as he entered and, seeing his face, nodded once. "Yes," she said softly. It is nearly time. Elias sat opposite her. The fire gave a low pop in the hearth. Outside, a pale mist moved over the meadow, and the porch vines glowed blue in the dimness. "I don't know where I'll wake," he said. Mira smiled. "Usually where one belongs next." He traced a finger along the rim of his cup. "Will I remember this place? Not all at once? Not in the way you remember errands or addresses?" She tilted her head, listening to the kettle begin its sleepy murmur. "But you may remember how your shoulders feel when they finally soften. The way silence can be kind. The feeling of a light ahead on a dark path. Those memories know how to return." Elias let out a long breath he had not realized he was holding. They drank tea together as the cabin slowly brightened with the silver blue of Dreamland morning. Mira warmed bread. Elias fed the fire. The ordinary tenderness of these small tasks made the moment even gentler. When the time came, he put on his coat, now dry and soft, with cabin warmth. Mira wrapped a scarf around his neck, tucking the end in with the care of someone tending a child or a dear friend, leaving before dawn. At the door, he lifted the frosted lantern. "It comes with me?" he asked. "If it wishes," Mira said, and the quiet humor in her eyes returned. "Try not to force it." He laughed then, a low, warm sound that seemed to please the cabin itself. The wind bell gave one tiny note beneath the eaves. They stepped onto the porch. The meadow stretched pale and luminous, the path through the trees visible in a faint silver line. Beyond the cabin, the edge of the world glowed softly, as if the horizon were breathing. Elias turned once more to look at the cedar walls, the chimney, the windows, the vines with their tiny blue lights. He looked at Mira standing in the doorway, shawl around her shoulders, lantern glow at her back. "Thank you," he said, and the words were simple but full. Mira placed one hand over her heart and bowed her head slightly as if receiving something precious. "Travel gently." He crossed the meadow. With each step, the mist rose and curled around his boots. The lantern in his hand glowed softly, lighting the grasses, the white flowers, the edges of stones. At the tree line, he paused and looked back. The cabin stood warm and golden against the vast dream horizon, as steady and welcoming as a star. Then the wind moved through the pines, and the branches shifted, and for a moment the meadow was veiled in silver mist. When it cleared, the cabin was still there. And then, a few steps later, it was farther away than it should have been. A few steps more, and it looked smaller, like a lantern seen across water. A few steps after that, the trees gathered around the path, and he could no longer see it at all. Still, the warmth remained. The forest was quiet now in that deep and living way. Moss cushioned the path. The stars above shone steady and kind. Somewhere ahead, beyond the trees, there was the soft suggestion of another place, another morning, another life waiting to be re-entered with gentler hands. Elias walked without hurry. The lantern's glow kept pace with his breathing. In the cabin at the edge of the world, Mira stood on the porch until the last thread of the lantern light disappeared among the trees. Then she lifted her face to the sky, where the moons had faded and the stars were paling into a pearly dawn. The wind carried the scent of thawing earth and pine and distant rain. She went inside, fed the hearth, and set the kettle on. There would be other travelers. There always were. A chair waited by the fire. A quilt waited in the loft. A path waited beneath the trees, silvered by whatever moon happened to rise. And somewhere, in some waking room, perhaps near a window, perhaps in the hush before morning, Elias would stir and breathe more deeply than he had in a long time. He might not remember cedar beams or blue porch lights or the sound of the dream sea under stars, but he would feel for a little while the echo of a cabin's warmth. He would know, without needing to name it, that rest was real, that a light can wait for you, that even at the edge of the world there is a door opening quietly, a kettle singing low, in a place where nothing is asked except that you breathe and soften and sleep. And now the night grows softer still. The fire lowers to embers. The wind settles against the walls. The stars drift farther out like lanterns carried gently across dark water. Let everything become simple. A warm room. A quiet sky. A slow breath in. A slow breath out. If thoughts come, let them pass like mist over the meadow. If sounds come, let them fade into the hush of pines and distant sea. There is nowhere to go now, nothing to hold, nothing to finish. Only rest, only the gentle dark. Only the feeling of being carried softly and safely toward sleep. Good night, dear traveler. Sleep well.